The phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. Earl Bristow was already at the kitchen table with his coffee because he had been up since 5, the way he had been up since 5 for 46 years. His daughter's name was on the screen. "Dad," Sarah said, "are you sitting down?" He was. "There's an auction notice in the paper this morning, the Madison County paper, page 7. They're auctioning the south half of your property, today, 10 a.m., at the courthouse." Earl did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the window above the sink. The light outside was still gray. "Dad, are you there?" "I'm here." "They can't do that, can they? They can't auction your land without telling you." "No," Earl said. "They can't." He hung up. He drove to the gas station in town and bought a copy of the Madison County Gazette. The notice was on page 7 in the lower right corner in the legal announcements section. Public auction. The legal description was the south 120 acres of his farm, the parcel his grandfather had broken in 1928. The sale was scheduled for 10 o'clock that morning on the steps of the Madison County Courthouse in Winterset, Iowa. The seller was listed as Riverbend Asset Holdings, LLC. He had never heard of Riverbend Asset Holdings. He drove home. He went into the small room off the kitchen that his wife, Lorraine, had used as her sewing room before she died of pancreatic cancer in 2017. He opened the closet. He pulled down a cardboard tube from the top shelf. The tube had been there since 1973. Earl Bristow was 74 years old. He had lived on the same 640 acres of farmland in Madison County, Iowa, for 68 of those years. The land had come down from his grandfather, Henry Bristow, who had bought it in 1928 from a man named McCallum for $32 an acre. Henry had broken the sod by hand and with 2 mules, and had built the original farmhouse with lumber milled from his own timber on the North Ridge. Henry passed the land to his son, William, in 1956. William passed it to Earl in 1981 when his health failed and he could no longer climb onto a tractor. Earl had been 30 years old that year. His father had stood in the kitchen and said one thing to him about the land. He had said, "Don't ever sell the south half. Whatever happens, don't sell that." Earl had asked why. His father had said, "Because of what's in the tube." Earl had not opened the tube in 1981. He had not opened it in 1985 when a neighbor offered him a price for the south pasture. He had not opened it in 1998 when a hog operation wanted to lease it. He had not opened it in 2009 when a wind energy company sent a representative with a clipboard. The tube sat on the closet shelf in Lorraine's sewing room, and Earl honored his father's instruction, and he never sold the south half. He did not need to know what was in the tube to obey the man who had told him to keep it. Lorraine had asked him once in 2003 what was in the cardboard tube on the closet shelf. He had told her he did not know. She had laughed and said that was the most Earl Bristow answer she had ever heard. The tube was long and yellowed at the ends. The cardboard had softened over 53 years. Earl carried it to the kitchen table and set it down beside his coffee. He did not open it yet. He picked up the phone instead and called a lawyer named Tom Reedy in Winterset. Reedy was 61 years old, semi-retired, and had handled Earl's affairs since Lorraine's estate work in 2017. Earl explained the auction notice. Reedy was quiet on the line for a moment. "Earl," Reedy said, "I have to ask you, is there any chance there's a lien you don't know about? An old mortgage, an unpaid tax, anything?" "No." "You're certain?" "My grandfather paid for that land in cash in 1928. My father paid the inheritance tax in 1956 and again in 1981. I've paid every property tax on time for 45 years. There is no lien." Then this is fraud, Earl. Or it's a clerical error of a kind I've never seen. Either way, the auction is at 10. We have less than 3 hours. I know. Bring whatever paperwork you have. Bring everything. I'll meet you at the courthouse at 9:30. Earl hung up. He looked at the tube on the table. He took a kitchen knife and slid it under the metal cap on the end. The cap came off with a small breath of dust. He tipped the tube. A roll of paper slid out, tied with a piece of string, the paper itself the color of old tea. He untied the string. He unrolled the paper on the kitchen table. It was a map, hand-drawn, black ink, edges worn from where someone had handled it carefully over many years. The paper was a survey of the Bristow property, dated April 11, 1932, signed by a county surveyor named J.R. Whitlock. The lines were precise. The measurements were written in a small, careful hand. The legend in the lower right showed the boundaries of the original 640 acres. Earl looked at the map for a long time. The south 120 acres on Whitlock's 1932 survey did not match the south 120 acres on the current county plat. The line ran differently. The line ran almost a quarter of a mile farther south than the current records showed. Earl Bristow was 74 years old, and he was not a lawyer, and he was not a surveyor, but he could read a map. The land that Riverbend Asset Holdings, LLC, was attempting to auction at 10 o'clock that morning was not the south 120 acres of the Bristow farm. It was somebody else's land, or, more precisely, the parcel that Riverbend Asset Holdings claimed to own. The parcel they were auctioning overlapped his land by the full 120 acres. Both parcels could not exist. One of them was wrong. The 1932 survey showed which one. He rolled the map carefully. He tied the string. He carried the tube to the truck. Riverbend Asset Holdings, LLC, had been formed in Delaware in November of 2024. It was a subsidiary of a larger acquisition company called Meridian Land Partners, which specialized in what its website called title arbitrage, the acquisition of properties with disputed, ambiguous, or incomplete title records, which were then auctioned to clear the cloud and resold to developers or agricultural investors at a margin. The man who handled the Madison County file was named Curtis Devane. He was 36. He had a master's degree in real estate finance from a university in Texas. He had never visited the Bristow property. He had never met Earl Bristow. He had identified the parcel through an automated title search that had flagged a discrepancy in the 1956 inheritance filing, a clerical error in which the legal description of the south 120 acres had been entered incorrectly by a clerk in the Madison County Recorder's Office. The error had sat in the records for 70 years. Devane's algorithm had found it in 11 minutes. The notice requirements for the auction had been satisfied, technically, by the publication in the Madison County Gazette. The certified mail to the listed property owner had been sent to an address that had not been Earl Bristow's address since 1979. Devane had not personally checked. The system had generated the address from the 1956 filing. Earl Bristow was the 18th Iowa landowner Riverbend Asset Holdings had targeted in 14 months. 16 of them had lost their land before they knew what was happening. Earl met Tom Reedy on the courthouse steps at 9:28. Reedy looked at the map for 90 seconds, then he looked at Earl. "Where has this been?" "In a tube, in a closet." "For how long?" "Since 1932. Reedy did not say anything for a moment. He folded the map carefully along its existing creases. He handed it back. "Earl, this stops the auction. You understand that?" "I understand. But I have to be honest. They will fight it. They will say the map is not authenticated. They will say the discrepancy in the 1956 filing supersedes a 1932 survey. We may be in court for a year. We may be. The auctioneer was a man named Bill Crandall, who had run public auctions in Madison County for 31 years and who did not know Riverbend Asset Holdings from any other LLC. He had a list of 3 properties to sell that morning. The Bristow parcel was the second. There were 11 people gathered on the courthouse steps at 10 o'clock. 3 of them were investors. 2 were curious neighbors. The rest were courthouse staff on a smoke break. Crandall began the auction at 10:02. He read the legal description. He opened the bidding at $400,000. A man in a gray jacket bid $410. Earl raised his hand. Crandall did not see him. Earl raised his hand again. He was standing toward the back of the small crowd. He was wearing his brown coat and his hat. He was holding the cardboard tube. A second bid came in at $425. Earl raised his hand a third time. Crandall, looking past him toward the front bidders, called out $450. Tom Reedy stepped forward. "Mr. Crandall," Reedy said. "Mr. Crandall." Crandall paused. "Sir, if you have a bid, please." "Mr. Crandall, I am Thomas Reedy, attorney representing Earl Bristow, the legal owner of the property currently being offered for sale. We have evidence of a title defect in the seller's claim. I am formally requesting you halt the auction pending verification." Crandall hesitated. Crandall had run 31 years of auctions. He had never had a lawyer interrupt one. He looked at the man in the gray jacket. He looked at the courthouse staff. He looked at Earl. "Sir, do you have documentation?" Earl walked forward. He uncapped the tube. He unrolled the 1932 survey on the small folding table the auctioneer had set up beside him. He did not say anything. Crandall looked at the map. He was not a surveyor. He could not read it the way a surveyor could read it. But he could see that the lines on the 1932 survey did not match the legal description he had just read aloud. The man in the gray jacket, who was in fact Curtis Devane, who had flown in from Dallas the night before, stepped forward. "That document hasn't been authenticated. The seller has a recorded title. This auction is proceeding." Behind him, the side door of the courthouse opened. A man in a tan uniform stepped out onto the courthouse steps. He was the Madison County Sheriff, a man named Ralph Iverson, who had held the office for 16 years. He had been called by Tom Reedy at 9:45 from the front seat of Reedy's car. Iverson walked over to the auction table. He looked at the map. He looked at Crandall. He looked at Devane. "Mr. Crandall," Iverson said, "I'd like you to suspend this proceeding." "Sheriff, there's a question of whether the seller in this auction has clear title. Until that question is resolved, I'm asking you not to complete this sale. I can ask formally if you'd prefer." Crandall set down his clipboard. "The auction is suspended," Crandall said, "pending verification." Devane started to speak. Iverson turned to him. "Sir," Iverson said, "I'd like to see your identification." Devane produced a driver's license from Texas. Iverson wrote down the name. He wrote down the LLC. He wrote down the address. "Mr. Devane," he said, "I think you'll be hearing from the county attorney." The map went back into the tube. The litigation that followed lasted 8 months. Riverbend Asset Holdings LLC challenged the authenticity of the 1932 survey in 3 separate filings. The county recorder's office produced its archive. J.R. Whitlock's surveying records, kept by his grandson in a barn in Winterset, were located and entered into evidence. The 1956 clerical error was identified, documented, and corrected. The Bristow title was confirmed. The federal civil suit Earl filed against Meridian Land Partners settled in November for $1.1 million in damages, plus attorney's fees, plus a permanent injunction against any further title actions in the state of Iowa. Curtis Devane was named in the suit personally. He left the company in February. Earl walked the south fence line with his daughter on a Sunday afternoon the following spring. They did not say anything for a long time. The fence had been built by Earl's grandfather in 1929. Most of the original posts were gone. The wire had been replaced 4 times, but the line was the same line. They walked all the way to the south corner. They stood at the corner post for a few minutes. Sarah's hand rested on the top of the post. She was 46. She had 2 sons of her own. "He told you not to sell it," she said. "He did. Did he ever tell you why?" "He told me the why was in the tube." She looked out across the field. The field was still brown. The wind was coming up from the south. "I'm going to tell mine the same thing," she said, "when the time comes." Earl did not answer. He looked at the post. He looked at his daughter's hand on the post. After a while, they turned and walked back along the fence the way they had come, slowly, neither of them in any hurry. Some inheritances are money, some are land. The rarest and the most valuable is the instruction, the single sentence passed from one generation to the next, kept on faith for 50 years without question. William Bristow did not explain the tube to his son. He did not have to. Earl carried the instruction the way his father had carried it, and a quiet morning in a sewing room closet was the day the line held. Tell me in the comments, if your father had handed you a sealed tube and told you never to sell the south half, would you have opened it the day he gave it to you? Or would you have waited until you needed to?